Remember this?
Is there anything more American than going to a football game and seeing our soldiers on the field unfurling a big U.S. flag? Well, new reports show the U.S. Department of Defense is actually paying the NFL millions, that's millions of dollars, to honor our troops at the games using your taxpayer money.
When lawmakers,
along with sports fans across America, I was appalled to learn last month that many of the ceremonies honoring members of our armed services at NFL games are not actually being conducted out of a sense of patriotism, but for profit in the form of millions of dollars in taxpayers' money going from the Department of Defense to wealthy NFL franchises. In fact, NFL teams have received nearly $7 million in taxpayers' dollars over the last 3 years from contracts with the Army National Guard, which includes public tributes to American soldiers, sailors, and airmen, and Marines.
Spoke out.
What prompted you to look into this?
Well, so far, everybody's just kind of shocked. And let me say as well, I don't begrudge the NFL or any team from signing these contracts. It's a form of advertising. They get the revenue. Who I fault is DOD, Department of Defense, and the government for actually doing this.
Right.
Now, I can see the reason. I think we all can. The need to recruit, set up a recruiting tent or have a relationship with teams for that purpose. But when everybody assumes when you have these feel-good moments, these salutes, that it's because the NFL team just felt good about the military or about service, and then to find out now it's really the taxpayers paying for that just leaves you with an empty feeling.
On the NFL and paid patriotism.
Turns out that from 2011 to 2014, the Department of Defense spent $5.4 million in contracts with 14 NFL teams for flag ceremonies. The National Guard got in on the action too and gave $6.7 million to the NFL for the same kind of thing from 2013 to 2015.
Which meant flyovers such as these, or reunions between family members such as these, as Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona would say, feel-good moments. Well, they were staged for recruitment by the United States Department of Defense. These practices would also take place elsewhere.
The Senate Oversight Committee said, unfortunately, and they investigated this, they said, unfortunately, contrary to the public statements made by the Department of Defense and the NFL, the majority of the contracts, 72 of the 122 contracts we analyzed, clearly show that the Department of Defense paid for patriotic tributes at professional football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and soccer games. These paid tributes included an on-the-field color guard, enlistment and re-enlistment ceremonies, performances of the national anthem, full field flag details, ceremonial first pitches, and puck drops.
A few examples were Major League Baseball's Detroit Tigers when they supported Customs and Border Patrol agents. ICE agents were being honored and cheered at Washington Nationals games, also in Major League Baseball. The Dallas Cowboys partook in this and much more. Deadspin would write, unsuspecting audience members became the subjects of paid marketing campaigns rather than simply bearing witness to teams' authentic, voluntary shows of support for the brave men and women who wear our nation's uniform. It is hard to understand how a team accepting taxpayer funds to sponsor a military appreciation game or to recognize wounded warriors or returning troops can't be construed as anything other than paid patriotism. Funny enough, Joe Buck and Troy Aikman would mock this on a hot mic.
It's a lot of jet fuel just to do a little flyover. That's your hard-earned money and your tax dollars at work. That stuff ain't happening with Kamala Biden ticket. I'll tell you that right now.
Bill Astor, a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, despised the military flyovers. He would say this, to me, it's not something that I see should be flying over a sports stadium before a baseball game or a football game. You know, these are weapons of death. They may be required, but they certainly shouldn't be celebrated and applauded. He'd add, to learn that these had been paid for, that corporate teams owned by billionaires basically were collecting money from the military, paid for obviously by you and me, by the American taxpayer. Well, it was sad. Indeed it was. That's where we introduce, though, the supposed apolitical actor when he's talking to Fox News, and former WWE wrestler Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Steve Bannon of military.com reported in April of 2024 that a deal was inked for $11 million to, quote, be the premier partner for the UFL's inaugural season, which would start soon thereafter, and created a relationship between the Army and The Rock, an owner of the league. This came after the XFL and USFL would merge and become the UFL. Via Bannon, service planners behind the scenes spent much of the past year warning that the advertising bang for the buck simply was not there, documents would show. Internal data reviewed by military.com found that the Army estimated the UFL sponsorship deal would net only between 160 and 891 recruits. That wouldn't happen. It was clear, though, from those internally that this would be a mess financially, a giant mess, and meeting the recruiting goals would not happen, which, by the way, they continually miss. Even with all this intel, Army Chief of Staff Randy George would reportedly finalize this push of a partnership. And what did the deal include? The logo of the Army, not only smack dab on the field, but also placed on the jerseys of those on rosters in the UFL. Another huge part, though, was The Rock being an ambassador on his social media pages to promote the partnership. The deal would include the Army logo being displayed prominently on the jerseys of 8 teams. That's what I wanted to include. 8 teams. However, here's the latest from ESPN. The Army is seeking to recoup money from an $11 million marketing deal with the United Football League and The Rock after the partnership failed to yield a single new recruit. And that's according to military.com. They are citing Army documents, by the way. From a social media perspective, Front Office Sports would have more. Internal documents reviewed by the outlet show the UFL co-owner made only 2 of the 5 social media posts the parties agreed upon. Not great. The Army valued Johnson's IG posts at $1 million a pop. Clearly, it didn't work out. From Bannon, the UFL deal was so catastrophic it led to a projected loss of 38 enlistments. An internal review of the plan would show Army planners use a ton of metrics to judge whether time and money could be better spent in other efforts, and the effort and resources spent on the UFL were seen by the service as a net negative for recruiting people. And guess what? They were vindicated in those reports. The underlying issue goes as follows, though. Having previously relied on traditional means like linear TV commercials, organizations like the Army are trying to find different avenues to reach a younger generation via social media. One thing that doesn't help them is that they are not allowed to do so on the biggest platform of all, TikTok. Colonel Dave Butler told military.com, in terms of The Rock, it's unfortunate he was pulled away at a time when we expected him to be present with us to create content for his social media. The Rock remains a good partner to the Army, so good cleanup there at the end. From the Daily Beast, this is outrageous. The failed deal comes after the National Guard blew $88 million on a partnership deal with NASCAR. That also yielded 20 recruits, according to USA Today. How exactly they come up with those numbers beats me. To give an idea of viewership via Front Office Sports, its championship game in June averaged nearly 1.6 million viewers on Fox. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson purchased the XFL along with his former wife and business partner and Redbird Capital Partners for $15 million in August of 2020. The league had filed for bankruptcy in April of that year. Johnson, Garcia, and Redbird now share 50% ownership of the UFL. The other half is owned by Fox. I'm sorry that my dog is continually barking. No idea what's going on there. So it's very interesting to me that when it's kept under wraps and behind the scenes and it's not just in your face as a partnership, it was seen as a positive, and these feel-good stories that were written about time and time again, and the tweets went viral, and Inside Edition dedicated a piece to it, and ESPN would have different pieces on this as well, where someone who was fighting overseas for the right to kneel, they would be fighting, and they came back, and it was such a joyous occasion, and everyone is all smiles, and everyone in the stadium gets up after they go take a dump during the national anthem, and they applaud and, hoorah the entire thing. But then we learned that it was all fugazi, and it was all nonsense. And now that the partnership was announced, granted, it is not the NFL, it is the UFL. They are supposedly getting a net negative. I find this to be rather peculiar. What I also find to be interesting is, did The Rock and his team forget, or was he implored to not do this? Because they take a look at all of these metrics, especially when it is a mega A-list celebrity like this. They want to know what works and what doesn't. Did these have a net negative on him? Could it potentially be worth it to not honor his part of the deal? I just find all this to be very interesting. Very, very interesting. If anything breaks, we'll update you. If you can and are willing, please become a paid member here at TYT Sports. And or go to tyt.com/join. In addition, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Appreciate it. Have a great day.